Hello, and welcome to VOD of Consciousness with Sientir. I'm Sientir, and I should remember to plug my Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir. And we're going to try to take care of a few more enemies. Notably, these avalanches are giant problems. And we need to be very careful about them, because they use Maelstrom and stuff, and cause a lot of consternation for my casters, is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Ooh. I got exactly what I was hoping for. Okay, so the boss is up there. It's the Remnant of Antiquities, I suppose. Let's see if this gives us... Nope, just 20 dwarf rep points, which is fine, but not what I was hoping for. I should move. I am in a bad place. Why am I being affected by... whatever. Yeah. Man, I'm just... Sorry, I'm reflecting on one of the things that was talked about a lot in the Great Designer Search 3 stuff that I've been reading, which is consider play patterns, consider play patterns, consider play patterns, consider how things will play, basically. With the fundamental issue being that it needs to be considered how something's going to play when you design it. You need to think, well, what are players going to do with this when I hand it to them? And the issue that can develop if you don't do that is you're going to make stuff either that's not useful or that's overpowered, just different things like that. And it's a real problem. You really do need to think about how are people going to use this thing in practice, right? That was a badly timed. You move like a dwarf, but whatever. This is a boss, by the way, so it just has a giant pile of health. We didn't have to keep the NPC alive, by the way. The NPC will be just fine. They have some auto-res technology that they introduced with this game that was really good. Actually, they might have introduced it. Did they introduce it with the previous... with Nightfall? I don't know. I know it's in this one, but... mostly at this point, this is just like a dude with giant pile of health, and we just have to push our way through that gigantic pile of health. I think we're probably pretty stable. Unfortunately, we have Elias is just like complete dead weight in our party. Just because I set him up as a minion master build, and there's just not enough enemies to work with for that to be useful. But anyway, like I was saying, play patterns are really important to consider when you're designing anything. It's important to think about how people are going to actually use it when they get their hands on it. And one of the... Oh, or we're doing better than I thought we were. One of the problems that comes up, particularly with the Paragon, is that I feel like how players are going to use it wasn't really taken into consideration. There's a bunch of weird build-around me's that are just really awkward to try to use. And that's just kind of unfortunate. So we open this chest. Ooh, a Cephas sword. That seems like it might be really cool. You know what? I'm just going to pop these sparklers, because why not? Okay. So our team was victorious. Now we just wait a couple of minutes and we'll be popped out of here. I will accept this reward. Thank you. So let's see what this Cephas sword does. Oh, it's highly salvageable. It's fiery. Actually pretty good stats overall in terms of being Rec 9, which is kind of the lowest you can get and stuff. But anyway, so the reason why I kind of am inclined to wait here, but it's just not worth it. So let's just go back to Safala and not worry about any of whatever. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I don't like that error code. Yes. Maybe? Okay, so we're just gonna wait here for this timer to run out and see what happens, I guess. There's something weird's going on. Let's identify a couple more items. Pick up this Lesser Guardian Spear while we're here, I guess. Okay. What's going on? My ping is fine. I'm connected to some random IP. Boy, that's completely thrown me for a loop. Let's see. Around this area, you move 33% slower. Oh, that's annoying. I don't know what's going on. What is happening? Well, we might be having some technical difficulties, everyone. I don't know why or what to do about them specifically, but my train of thought's been completely blown to pieces by it. But I was talking about play patterns and about how a lot of Paragon skills are kind of garbage because of play pattern issues. Yeah, because they are. A lot of play pattern issues where it's like, why would somebody use this? Or what's the case that you expect people to be using this in? Like this one, Energizing Chorus, the next shout or chant used by each ally within your shot costs less. That's probably reasonable to use, honestly, in a motivation build instead of go for the eyes. But it's just, it doesn't get thought of. I should really consider that, but whatever. Motivation is just kind of awkward to use anyway. Yeah, okay, so we're having this weird server connection issue, which is causing things to not work. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do from that standpoint. Don't know why this has started happening. Like, I can just talk about arbitrary stuff and see what ends up happening. Sword looks interesting. Help. Help, everything's broken. Okay. Well, let's just pick something interesting to talk about while I'm stuck here waiting for the game to figure out how to reconnect. So let's go ahead and look at my list of stuff. Oh yeah, this is an interesting topic. So there's a okay, Gunner's Hold, good to know. There's a so there's cultural. I'm going to just refer to it. I call it cultural siloing in my notes. So my note about this topic is just specifically cultural siloing, or not understanding how cultures differ from our own, and then kind of assuming other cultures work as ours and do or have the same problems, etc. So this is something that I definitely notice with Americans in particular, and I can say this because I'm American, right? Is that we tend to be extremely caught up in our own culture. We tend to be extremely caught up in sort of what's going on in America. There's a lot of people here, but part of what goes on contributes to this is that we have just an incredibly strong media presence. Our media presence, I guess, as I was using the term, is just incredibly powerful. And the result of this is that we can very easily get caught up in sort of our own selves, our own culture, our own problems, our own issues, our own successes and failures, and not really understand what's going on in the rest of the world, because we're not as heavily exposed to culture from the rest of the world, to media from the rest of the world, because we're just such a culture powerhouse in terms of exporting movies and all of that sort of stuff. We don't necessarily see what's going on or consider what's going on in other cultures. I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about watching anime, by the way, is anime being, or the anime that's created in Japan, to be clear, because there's stuff that I would classify as anime that's not made in Japan, but I digress. Having sort of the exposure to that and what's going on there, how can we get an update about who won in the Hall of Heroes but have server connection issues? I wonder if I can go to my guild hall. Yeah. Does this work? No. Okay. Anyway. So anime, it kind of exposes to Japanese cultural ideas because it's being made by the Japanese. And I think this is something that is an interesting issue in America. It's just kind of an aside, is that we have so many different subcultures. We have just white suburban subculture, as it were. We have, I mean, it's a pretty dominant culture, really, but we have sort of black inner city culture. We have southern culture versus like northern culture, city versus urban or rural. Yeah, city, which is urban, versus like rural culture. Like, different areas have different sort of subcultures going on. And this is something else that can kind of come up as a problem. Actually, I have notes about how it would be really good to talk about this other sort of topic, which is sort of the idea that people have very different perspectives. Like, the way that our perspectives are built kind of come from the culture that we're derived from, which is kind of a mix of like values and I mean, what is a value anyway? But just kind of what the moral code is of the culture that you come from, I guess, is kind of the way that I'd phrase it, or how morals are considered, what's considered socially acceptable, those sorts of things. That's kind of what like culture is built out of, right? As well as like jargon. So things that translate as concepts that one culture has that may be different in another one. And one of the things that happens is when you come from a certain culture, it flavors your perspective. So even if you understand a concept from another, like, in the same sort of way, or have the same sort of like overall opinion about it, the way that you view it might be very different from what somebody else would view it as. So for myself, for example, I come from a very sort of Midwest conservative culture, and so I tend to view things through that viewpoint, even if the views that I'm holding would be considered more liberal. And I think that's very interesting, but it means that it can be very difficult to discuss stuff. It's hard to reconcile things when viewpoints are too divergent from each other. You run into this fundamental issue where you have topics that people might agree on, but because they're discussing them from very different viewpoints in very different ways, and it's also just like the way that they view the world. So, for example, you see a particular issue that's happening, and the way that you've been taught to think about things from your culture means the way that you approach understanding, interpreting, and presenting a solution for thing differs from culture to culture, and that causes problems when two different cultures have radically different approaches to viewing stuff, and it can make it very hard to communicate. It can make it very hard to come to common solutions. It can make it very hard to agree at what the problem is, or about what the problem is. And it's just a giant pile of unfortunate stuff all around. It's kind of what I'm getting at. And I wish that wasn't the case, but there's not a whole lot that I know of to do about it. I'm getting data transfer and stuff. I don't know what's going on over here with all of these server disconnect issues. But this cultural siloing even happens like within America, and not to mention America to other cultures. It can be very hard to understand. Like, at this point, this is no longer like a registered item or whatever, but it's like, why continue to try to do things? Because I've got like, anyway. When people have different cultural bases that they work from, it can make it very hard to understand each other. So the way that, for example, people in China are taught to view the world versus how people in, say, Britain or France or America or Canada or Mexico or Colombia or wherever else, we're all kind of taught to view the world in different sorts of ways, and it causes lots of problems when our understanding of how to interpret the world is fundamentally different. Yeah, this is just not connecting to anything. It creates all sorts of issues with trying to reconcile stuff and communicate. And the other thing that becomes a real problem is we build up cultural assumptions about how things work, and then if things work differently in a different culture, it creates conflict that didn't need to be there. And it's very unfortunate and very frustrating that this happens. Because it means that there's a lot of problems in the world that kind of go unresolved as a result of it. Anyway, I thank you for joining me on this very weird VOD of consciousness with all of these tech issues. Until next time, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.